Are you new to the quarterback position? Or maybe you just want to build your knowledge? In this video series, QB101, we're going to be covering all the basics that you need to know. We'll be breaking down a whole bunch of different topics to not only help you succeed in the quarterback position, but to make sure you have fun doing it. In this video, we're going to go over some basic terminology we use for the defense. Now, there's a bunch of different alignments, but we want to go over mainly the terminology that we're going to be using. So we have our offense set up, and our X's are going to represent our defenders. So the first thing we have is our safeties, and that's the defender that's furthest back, usually anywhere from 10 to 15 yards back from the line of scrimmage, all right? Sometimes we can have two safeties, all right? So we might have them back here, all right? But the most common that we see in 9-on-9 football is usually a single high safety, right? So we have one, all right? Next, working from the outside in, we have our corners, all right? So our cornerbacks, again, they can be anywhere from 1 yard off the receiver all the way to 10, even 12 yards back. Wherever they want to line up, that's our corners. And collectively, the corners and the safety, we call defensive backs, all right? From there, we're going to work in. So we have our outside linebackers. These players' responsibility usually is covering the slot receivers, as well as they do have a degree of run responsibility, all right? So our outside linebackers, working in from there, we have our inside linebackers, all right? Now, usually what we use to define a linebacker as inside or outside is whether they are inside the tackle box. Now, for regular 11-on-11 football, anything inside the tackles would be the tackle box, all right? So it's like an imaginary box. Because we only have guards, I usually refer to anyone within 1 yard of the guards to be inside the tackle box, all right? Finally, from there, we have our D-line. So they are the defenders that are right up on the line. Obviously, they are usually within the tackle box. Sometimes they can be outside, but they are right up on the line. Going into a little bit more detail, all right? For the D-line, all right, we usually have D tackles, or we also have nose tackles, all right? Don't stress too much about that terminology, but the important one is when we talk about defensive ends, all right? So they're players that are on the ends. And once we have a three-man line, we would usually refer to these two players as the defensive ends, and this would be a defensive tackle, all right? So when we talk about defensive ends, they are usually on the ends, on the sides, all right, overhanging the sides, all right? It does start to get a little bit confusing when we start to add in a tight end as to who's who in the zoo, all right? But for the most part, you don't have to worry about too much complexities. You got your D-line, your linebackers, and your defensive backs. The next thing we want to talk about is their roles and responsibilities, as well as their alignment. So where they're lining up. Obviously, how we line up on offense may dictate and change how they line up on defense. And if it doesn't, that's another video where we're going to talk about taking advantage of the defense. But let's start talking about the corners, all right? Because this is probably the biggest one when we're passing, is how they're lining up. Now, if they're lining up far back, 8, 9, 10 yards, all right, we're talking about the corners being deep, all right? They're far back, so we want to be able to throw shallow. Sometimes they're going to line up right up in the receiver's face, and we call that press coverage. This is usually a sign that it's going to be man, all right? But it's not always, all right? They might be disguising as man and then dropping back into a zone. So continuing on that, we have two different types of coverages, all right? We have man coverage and zone coverage. And as the name suggests, man coverage means that each defender is covering a man, all right? So they're just gonna follow that receiver wherever they go, all right? That's their assignment. Or they could be dropping back into a zone, all right? So it's usually one or the other. It's not very often a combination, but when they drop back into zone, they might have a zone to cover each, and anything within that zone is their responsibility. Now, this is important for passing, what concepts are going to work, what concepts aren't going to work, and where we need to go with the ball. So that's it for the basics of terminology for our defense. There, of course, is much more that goes into playing defense, but we don't need to worry about that at this stage. If you had any questions about anything you've seen so far, leave a comment. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.